The Void is a 2017 horror throwback, if you will, to some of the greatest horror movies of days gone by, especially from the 80s, like The Thing, The Blob, Leviathan even. There are similarities to the special effects and makeup effects of those kind of movies. But as far as the story goes, it's actually considerably different to many of those movies. Now, this movie was partially crowdfunded, and it had its initial showing in 2016. It wasn't theatrically released, though, until 2017, and it's a movie which already has garnered kind of a cult following. And it's not difficult to see why movies like this tend to always do that, and I was thinking to myself why that's the case. And the conclusion that I came to is that people like myself, who are super fans of movies like The Thing, The Blob, Splinter, Leviathan, those kind of movies about creature feature or practical effect monster movies, the best of them, I would say, we clamour for any movie which is even remotely like that. So when a new one comes out, we want to love it. Now, that may sound like an obvious statement. Of course, you would always logically go into any movie hoping to love it. But with these films, at least speaking for myself, and I'm sure for some of you guys as well who are fans of those kind of throwback movies, or even when they were originally in the 80s, we want movies like that to be made. But they are so rarely done that we have to latch onto them and love them because it's all we've got. And sometimes, if we're honest about it, we have to overlook some failings because of how much we want to love the movie. Now, I would say there have been some very good monster B-movie style, but very well done movies like The Thing and The Blob in modern times. Splinter, as I mentioned, is an excellent one. I often say that Splinter is the best horror movie you've never seen. Some people have seen it, most people haven't. It's brilliant. And if you love The Thing, you will love Splinter. But there have been others too. Harbinger Down, for instance, sometimes referred to as Inanimate, was made by some of the guys who were involved in the special effects work on the 2011 prequel to The Thing, and that is also a great movie. It's a very clear homage to The Thing, but it takes place on a boat instead, which is cool. I love that movie, but at the same time I have to admit that it has its shortcomings. Of course it does. It doesn't have the huge backing that many other movies have. And generally speaking, these kind of movies don't have huge backing. They tend to be more passion projects. And that's one of the reasons why they have these cult followings, because there's this small but very dedicated band of people, myself included, who love these kind of movies. The Void is for that audience. This is not a movie for people who just love horror in general. If you are just a horror fan, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, then you'll probably enjoy it. But this isn't a movie for general horror audiences. This is a movie for people who specifically love those kind of creature feature, B-movie style, practical effect monster films. If that is your kind of party, then you'll probably like this film. Now, I wanted to see this movie as soon as it came out, but the simple fact was none of the cinemas near me were showing it, so I had to wait. I managed to pick up a copy of the DVD and checked it out. And initially, I wasn't sure what I thought of it. I wasn't necessarily disappointed, but it wasn't what I was expecting. Because I went into this movie as I go into any movie of its kind. Because at the end of the day, there is one movie which is the holy grail of this subgenre, and that is John Carpenter's The Thing. It is the #1 movie of this type. Everything that comes after that is by definition going to be compared to it, and that is the mindset that I have going into these movies. That's what I measure Splinter by, that's what I measure Harbinger Down by, that's what I measured this movie by. And for this movie, the simple thing is, and the simple fact is, you can't use that measuring stick. Because yes, it is in that same subgenre, but it's not aiming for the same goals. Because what I would recommend going into The Void, if you do get the chance to see it, is don't go in expecting The Thing. Go in expecting Event Horizon or Sunshine, because that is the way this movie has its story structure, the way it tells its story, and the kind of high concept which it's trying to go for. Because if you think about it, as brilliant as The Thing is, it's my favourite movie of all time, it's actually a really simple story. And the story does not drive the film. The characters drive the film. Likewise with The Blob. The story is very simple, but the characters and the effects drive the movie. With this film, that is not the case. The effects are brilliant when used, but they don't drive the movie. And neither do the characters, and to be honest, it's the characters and also the casting which I had the most issue with. Because although I wouldn't say that anyone in the film gives a bad performance, they're actually all a lot better than they easily could have been, and would usually be in a lower budget horror film, they aren't as connectable as I wanted them to be. Because in movies like The Thing, Splinter, The Blob, there are likeable people in there. They don't necessarily need to be the biggest actors around, although movies like The Thing did have that going for it, but you need characters who you attach to, who you want to win, who, of course, you don't find annoying by definition because you need to stick around these people. You could have one or two annoying characters, but they're generally used for fodder. And although in this film characters aren't strictly speaking annoying, certainly not compared to many other horror films, I just didn't have that connection to them. And for me that was kind of disappointing. Now the film overall is not a disappointment at all, and in fact watching it a second time I enjoyed it a lot more than the first, because the first time I had all kinds of expectations which it just didn't deliver on. But that's not the film's fault, that's my fault, because I was expecting The Thing. The second time going into it, I had an expectation of what it actually was and could appreciate that. Much in a similar way to the first time you watch something like Event Horizon, which is a supernatural sci-fi space horror, which is a pretty unique subcategory. When you go into that, if you expect Alien, you're going to be disappointed. But that's not what it's trying to be. Likewise with The Void, it's not trying to be The Thing, The Blob, Splinter, Harbinger Down. It's just not that movie. The Void is The Void, and it's in this own almost subgenre within the subgenre, kind of a alien, monster, supernatural, kind of everything bundled together category, where it's not strictly speaking any of them, it's often ambiguous, but that kind of works in the film's favour. You definitely have to watch this movie a few times before you start to get what the visuals mean. You can appreciate more of the practical effects, and a lot of the movie, including the ending, which I won't spoil, is left open to your own interpretation. And that is something which lends itself to rewatching, because with most movies like that, which have that kind of open-ended feel, you can go into them and be disappointed because it doesn't have a clear set finish. But often, I find, at least for me personally, that a movie like that, when you watch it a second time, you'll like it a lot more, because you know that that ending is coming, and then you can actually do what the ending wants you to do, which is think for yourself instead of having the movie finished for you. And that's cool, because movies like that will always have more rewatchability, but only for the people who are willing to get past that initial potential disappointment and check it out again. And that may sound to some people like an excuse for the film, but it's really not. You can't apply those same kinds of laws and logics to films which are deliberately ambiguous, because they're just not a traditional A meets B happily ever after kind of movie. That's just not what the point of the film is. Now, I've talked, of course, about a couple of things that I liked, a couple of things that I didn't. There were definitely things which I loved in this movie, and one of them is the effects. As soon as you see the practical effects in this movie, your mind will instantly go to The Thing. They are that good. They look awesome. The thing that I didn't like, though, and this really was unfortunate, is that the movie felt almost as if the guys behind it, as cool as they are for making this concept a reality, and I've gotta love them for it, but they don't have a clue how to use these practical effects, because they've got some incredible creatures in there, and you're just not given the time to appreciate them. Or even when you do see them, there's flashing lights, or flickering darkness, or the light of a flare, which just means that you can't see and appreciate all of the work that they've put in. And that kind of It doesn't ruin it, but it takes back from the enjoyment that you could have. Because, think about it, in, again, The Thing, you can see everything. There are no dark moments with the creature that you can't see the creature. You get to see full transformations in well-lit rooms, where you can appreciate the craftsmanship. And although it certainly doesn't ruin this movie, I do wish that they'd actually allowed us to see that craftsmanship which they had clearly put in, because a large portion of the crowdfunding aspect of the movie was for the practical effects. So why go to all of that trouble, making incredible practical effects, which they did do, and then not really giving them their screen time? That felt kind of a shame to me. Some of them are great, don't get me wrong. In fact, all of them are great. It's just the lighting which I had an issue with. And as far as stuff like music and the sound effects and the creature sound effects, they're great. I like the music of the film. Some of it you can hear in the trailer. I like the creature noises as well. Again, very reminiscent of those older monster movies. And if you're a fan of those, especially after a couple of rewatches, I think you'll love this movie as well. So with all of that being said, what about the individual scores? Well, first of all, we have the story and the plot. And for the story and plot of The Void, I'm actually going to be pretty generous for a movie of this type and give it a 7. Now, I wouldn't usually rate a film like this that high, because of how essentially simple the story usually is. And that's actually the exact reason why I'm not rating it lower, because this story does try and aim for bigger things. It's more of a high concept within the subgenre. And you've got to applaud it for that. It doesn't just follow the crowd and make a simple, easy out monster movie. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It tries something different. It tries to be its own thing. It doesn't copy any other movie, certainly not. And it gives you stuff to think about. And that's all great. So definitely a 7 from me. As far as the characters, the casting, the actions, decisions they make, motivations, all that kind of stuff, well, as I mentioned, that was probably the weakest part of the film for me. I didn't like the casting. There was only one actor who I'd ever seen before, and that was Kenneth Welsh. Apart from him, I didn't know anyone in the film. Not that they were bad, but as I said, I just couldn't connect to them. They felt more like TV movie actors rather than full-on movie. And for that, I'm going to have to give the film a 5. Now, a 5 out of 10 isn't a bad score. For those who are new to the channel, that's my baseline. I give every movie a starting score of 5 out of 10, because as far as I'm concerned, every movie should be at least a 5 out of 10. That's your baseline. If I score it lower than that, then of course it was subpar, and vice versa. If I score higher, it's better and better, up to a perfect 10. So for me, giving this movie a 5, it means exactly that. It wasn't amazingly good, but it definitely wasn't subpar. The actors were serviceable, they performed the roles well enough to carry the film, but it could have definitely been even better with not necessarily A-list actors, but just characters who you can connect to a bit more, who feel a little bit more fleshed out, and a bit more believable sometimes. As far as the special effects, practical effects, makeup effects, the visuals overall of the film, the camera work, lighting, well, despite my issues with said lighting, I am still going to give The Void a 10 out of 10, because the practical effects are incredibly good, they're very imaginative. There are some makeup effects, however, which aren't as good, especially towards the end of the film. There's one character in particular, and if you watch the movie you'll probably know what I mean, and the effects on that character don't look great. They're not CGI, but they don't look great, especially compared to the rest of the film. In another movie, if they were the only effects, it would be good enough. But in this movie, not so much. Compared to how great the rest of them look, it kind of stands out, or at least it did to me. But for me, I'm still giving it a solid 10 because it's great. There were little things here or there that I would have liked to have seen done differently, but you do always have to remember it's within a certain budget, within a certain genre, and there's only so much that you can do. As far as the music, the audio, the soundtrack, of course in a movie like this you have to also factor in creature design as far as audio, the noises that they make, the ambient sounds, the mood resulting from the music and the sounds, and overall for that, I'm going to give it an 8, because although it wasn't perfect, for instance the soundtrack wasn't overly memorable for me personally, but overall it did what it needed to do. The creature effects were cool, they were a nice throwback to some of the older monster films, and I liked it. So from me, it's an 8 out of 10. And finally, for the most personal category of the 5, the rewatchability and the entertainment factor. And for that, I'm going to give The Void an 8. Because although it doesn't have the kind of rewatchability that some others in the genre have, it is definitely a movie which requires multiple rewatchings to appreciate the effects, to appreciate the ambiguity and how it lets you think for yourself as to what certain things mean, what certain imagery means, what certain implied backstories and lore associated with the film means. And that was another thing that they managed to do really well. The film feels simultaneously very small and claustrophobic, but like it occurs in a very unique world with a lot of implied backstory to it and a lot of implied mythology. And I think that's one of the reasons why the film is getting cult status so quickly, because people like that kind of movie where you feel like there's this big, expansive, untold story behind the scenes, and The Void definitely has that feel to it. And so, overall, that means that as a tabulation of those 5 categories put together, I am giving The Void a pretty decent score, it has to be said, of 3.8 out of 5. Not an incredibly high score, certainly not as high as The Thing, some others as well in that kind of genre, but still, that's not bad at all. That's higher than plenty of other horror movies that I've reviewed, and I personally feel that that's about right. I don't love this movie, at least not yet, but it is definitely a film that I plan to rewatch a number of times, and most importantly of all, I would say, it is a movie that I would say earned the right to be considered in the same subgenre as movies like The Thing, The Blob, Harbinger Down, Splinter, and the like. And that in itself is a great thing in the film's favour. So, of course, I'd recommend checking it out if you're a fan of those kind of movies, and I'll see you guys next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.